Hit record. All right, it is recording. And good afternoon, everyone. So lovely to see you here. Hi to the planning committee members. And we're going to get started. But first and foremost, I just wanted to say happy Latinx Heritage Month. This wonderful conversation is being held because we have amazing individuals that have been working tirelessly all throughout summer to be able put this this presentation and this month of programming together. So thank you so much for all the campus partners that are here, and thank you so much to the OMSA team as well. Towards the end of this, so we can send some information about additional programs that will be there. I don't want to take too much time because I know everybody's here and being excited. There is a question in the chat around when the recording will be posted. Give us a couple of days after this presentation and it'll be sent to everybody who has registered for the presentation. So we'll make that accessible to you as well. But lastly, a big thanks to Anita, because Anita is really the mastermind behind this presentation. And I'm just going to stop talking and hand over the mic. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And again, without you and Christina and Dave working with us week after week, this would have not have been possible. So muchísimas gracias de mi corazón. Thank you very much from my heart. So everyone, welcome. Bienvenidos. We're so happy to have you here. I just want to first start out by saying that before we were in chains, before we were brought to the Americas in chains, we were painters, scholars, artists, poets, musicians, trilingual, right? Or even more than trilingual, multilingual individuals, right? First, I wanted to start with that. And then I wanted to share with you some of the mentors and individuals of Afro-Latinos, Latinas, Latinxes that over the years have inspired me since I was a little girl. Julia de Burgos, mulata, Puerto Riqueña. Gaspar Yanga, Mexican, African Mexican, the first in Mexico, that when the conquerors from Spain tried to destroy his village, he stopped it. Gaspar Yanga, Afro-Mexicano. Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, who later on Yosef will talk more about. And then having been raised Catholic, the first Black saint from Peru, born in Lima, Peru, San Martin de Porres, right? And many others. So this is very, very personal for us, everyone. Just want you to know that. For me, Shantany and Yosef, being Afro-Latinos living in Richmond, and being able to find one another and support one another has meant so much to us. And it's so very important to us to be able to share with all of you. We are here. We are not invisible, okay? And we're very strong. And actually 25% of Latinx people identify as Afro-Latinos in the United States now. And that number is continuously growing, and it will continue to be so. So just one quick historical fact, and we'll get started, is out of the approximately 10.7 million Africans that were brought to the Americas, only, and let me highlight this, only 388,000 only were brought to North America. All the rest were in Latin America. So I just want you to be aware of that very, very important fact. So this discussion is sort of a hybrid Shantini and Yosef are going to talk for about 15, 16 minutes each, because there's so much information that you need to know first before we can go into like the panel discussion. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with Shantini. Shantini is Afro-Costa Rican.
Muchas gracias, Profesora Nadal. Thank
Gracias
you,
a ti.
Professor Nadal. It's an honor to be here. And I am very excited to share information with my fellow community and people around the world, because who knows who's going to be watching. So I am very excited to be here. So my title, and can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Right. So my title is Afro-Latinidad in Richmond, Virginia.
Oh no. Shantini, you're muted.
I'm sorry, so I'm having technical difficulties. Dr. Kadiba, would it be okay if you would navigate for me, if that's not too much?
Let me go
I
ahead.
apologize.
Please do not apologize. No worries.
All righty, so we know that always issues with technology always do arise, but nevertheless, we have plan B always. Awesome, so thank you. So Afro-Latinidad in Richmond, Virginia from a Costa Rican perspective. I would like to speak to you from the point of view of where Afro-Latinos come from. And if you could see in this map where it says Puerto Limón, that's originally the area of the country where Blacks lived and where Blacks mingle, and where the historical Chiquita Banana production in the railroad building occur. But we'll start from the beginning. We need to have some building blocks in terms of the history and the accounts and how Black Costa Ricans arrived to Costa Rica. Next slide, please. So Costa Rica originally belonged to the Spanish Kingdom and had a hub in Mexico. So it was called the Mexican Vicereinato. So as being a hub, Costa Rica belonged technically under the supervision of Mexico. Independence during that timeline occurred around September of 1821. But due to the fact that communication and transportation was so rudimentary during those time frames, it didn't come until later in those months. On a side note, Costa Rica was also part of the Central American Federation, which had a headquarters in Guatemala. But this federation was kind of sort of in the brinks of a dissolution. That meant that all the members of that federation or association were going to become pretty much independent, and they'll have to rule under their own government because they wanted to mimic what the United States of America was doing in those times. So dissolution occurred on 1839, which led for Costa Rica's independence and sovereignty to occur under the chief of state, el señor José María Castro Madriz. He declares Costa Rica an national sovereign country, and officializes the independence of Costa Rica being September the 15th. Granted, Costa Rica is independent. That means that natives are able to own land, are able to mobilize anywhere in the country. However, Black Costa Ricans were not considered citizens until after the Civil War of 1949. That is when actually Costa Ricans, Black Costa Ricans, participated in the army in order to fight against the empowerment of other countries into our own soil. As they acquire citizenship, that did not preclude them from experiencing and living in an environment that was discriminatory, it had racism, and they were considered second-class citizens. By saying this, what I mean is that my grandparents were not allowed to come to the city, which would have been Costa Rica, in train, because that was the primary mode of transportation, without having a specific location where to stay, a specific timeline where to stay and how to stay, and having to return to their own country, locality, which at that time was Limon. And they were segregated in the form that they were allowed to ride on the back of the train, hint, similarly here to a lot of historical events that are common to many of our African ancestry, right? And so these were the ways in which Black Costa Ricans were discriminated against. However, there were still glimpses of sunshine. We as a community continue to strive and thrive under those conditions. There were times in which the economic conditions required additional labor, additional workforce. And so African Costa Ricans that lived in Costa Rica were able to be part of that workforce. They were able to construct and help build railroad in Costa Rica. They were able to work in the Chiquita Banana in Costa Rica, and they were able to grow infrastructure that provided avenues for the development of the traditional main source of income or revenue in Costa Rica, which is the coffee. The next slide, please. And so now we're going to be talking about the immigration aspect. Obviously, Costa Rica was going through a lot of political and economic changes. A lot of Black Costa Ricans were very poor, and they were looking for new avenues to provide for their families. This is a common theme among Africans or Black Latinos who have migrated or immigrated to the United States. But I want to talk about our story, our immigration story. As you can see, this is the picture of my grandmother. Her name is Miss Eulalie Ferguson Redgar Excel. She was born on February 19, 1927, and she was the first generation immigrant that arrived to the United States from our family. She actually recently passed away. She was 93 years old when she passed away in the midst of the pandemic. And she was a strong leader and very proud of her heritage. She would speak in Caribbean Jamaican and would say, what you want, or she will have her proverbs and make you smile because that's how she was. Nonetheless, Miss Eulalie, as she arrived as a young 36-year-old, lived in New York. And at that time, New York was the center or the hub for a diverse community and thriving state. So she worked as a maid and later on increased her skill set to become a nurse companion for many families that she provided care for. As an Afro-Latina in New York, she continued to provide for her family due to the fact that, again, families in Costa Rica were very poor. We were struggling because there was a lot of poverty. We were just coming out of a depression. We were just coming out of a series of economic distressful events that had impact in the lives and productivity of our countries. So they were looking for better life. They were trying to achieve freedoms in the pursuit of happiness, right? And as the year came by or went by, people started looking into the land of the rich and famous, how they call it back home, which was the United States, where more people started to immigrate to meet up with friends and families. And as you can see, there's also additional resources that document this migration. Next slide, please. And so now we want to focus on what it is to be an Afro descendant in Latin America or Central America or even South America, because as it was mentioned, the transatlantic impacted a lot of countries, and this Costa Rica and other countries were not the exception. But just to give you a little bit of data, because I know some of us are very big on that, immigration to the United States of America has significantly increased in the last decade. It went from low 4.7% all the way to 13%, and that's just up to 2019. Now, we know that 40% of the population is connected or has some origin to their Hispanic or Latino descent. Therefore, they have a primary language, at least they speak at home, of a 61.6%. So what about Virginia, right? So Virginia, we are ranked on the 12th in the state. So that means that we're the top 12, sort of, right? And we have the largest population of Latino, not to mention Richmond. Nationwide, now we're going to make an emphasis on Afro-Latino. We know that we represent 24% of the total population. So 1 in 3, imagine, that is a lot. And so we want to make sure that we also are representing and documenting how Afro-Latinos are identified. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. So in Richmond, just in Richmond, there are only, unfortunately, 674 individuals who have self-identified. And we'll talk about the identity of Afro-Latinos. As it will be mentioned, the immigration of Afro-Latinos, it's not linear. It's consistent, but it's not linear. It takes a lot of connections, a lot of information, and a lot of resources. So now we will talk about the different countries that have Afro-Latino descent or heritage. Next slide, please. So we know and we can see that a lot of Central, and I'm going to just make emphasis on Central American countries. We know that Mexico had Afro-Mexicans, which had an African heritage. We also know that Belize have Creoles, which are the local indigenous peoples, and the Garifunas who emigrated. And the Garifunas, interestingly enough, have African heritage. So they are direct African descents of a colony in the west coast of Africa. Obviously, Costa Ricans, we have Afro-Caribbean. So when you would hear a Costa Rican speak, you will hear them with a Jamaican accent. So we will talk like this and we will start conversation and we will have an accent actually comes up when you talk to people. Now, El Salvador, due to the fact that they have some immigration bans, you don't see that many Afro-Salvadoranians. So they have Afro-Mestizos, which is when they intermarried the natives of that local country and they had some heritage. But again, that has to do with some immigration bans that that country had established. And interestingly, it was not removed until recently, 1920. So it's not too far away. Now, Guatemala has and Honduras have a migration of a heritage of Garifunas. Again, they are African descents from West African countries. Although there are some Afro-Hondurians that come from West Indians. And so it's really interesting. Afro-Nicaraguans are primarily from the West Indians, and I've met many of these, and they are very interconnected with their cuisine and with their music. Afro-Panamanians have a blend. They are West Indians and they have Caribbean island background. So again, it is a rich culture that have variants in influences and how they originate and how their culture is perceived. So let us go a little bit deeper into identity and representation. Next slide, please. So in my country, we have several icons that represent Afro-Latinos in Costa Rica. All of these have Ms. Thelma is an actress. Ms. Epsi was the first Afro-Costa Rican vice president. We have many representatives of the diverse areas of entertainment, sports that are that have Afro heritage, and they are representing our communities. It's important to make an emphasis on what Afro-Latino means, and we will definitely talk a little bit more in depth as to how is that perceived as an individual. But there are things that we as Afro-Latinos bring to the space and lessons that we must learn and share with our allies. And those will be talked about or share with you in the next slide. The lesson learned are that Afro-Latinos is a diaspora that has experienced an intricate process of self-discovery. Not everybody recognizes their heritage, and there is no right or wrong way to do so. It has a close relationship between how culture and identity is perceived. Therefore, embracing our Afro-Latinidad is not a linear process, more so an experience, an environment, something we all have to give ourselves grace to. We know that we have been doing tests 21 or 22, discovering our heritage, where we're coming from, is the same concept with what Afro-Latino means. We have been so emancipated, and we have been so predestined to look at our structure from a social perspective or construct, that it's easy to fall under the standards of who you are based on a checkbox, right? So more research needs to be focused on Afro-Latino and the Afro-Latino culture and experience, because we don't have sufficient data that supports the narrative that we are talking about. How many people have actually had more experiences of Afro-Latinidad that are not being disclosed? In Virginia, we know that our Latino or Hispanic community and Latinx community, for those newer generations, is constantly growing, and the number of self-identified Afro-Latinos needs to be on the rise. We need to be represented. It has evidence. We need it. There's a lot of lessons to learn. I invite all of you to learn, to celebrate, and to honor Afro-Latino legacy and heritage. It is very rich. You will never have enough. You're actually gonna want more and more. We need more allies, and we need more friends who can celebrate with us and would embrace also and learn from our experiences. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And not to abruptly end, but I want to share the space to my colleague.
Huepa, gracias. Okay, everyone, now we're going to hear from Yosef Medina. He is a New Yorican He will later on talk about that. If for those of you who've never heard the term, many have not. So his experience and what he's going to share is going to be amazing.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And maybe if people could mute their phones, I heard some feedback. If you could mute your mic. Well, hallelujah. I'm blessed to be here. Thank you, Shantini, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you again for all of the organizers of this event. Is much needed. I'm going to dive right in. I know we don't have much time. You know, we have one learning objective in this presentation here. And that's just, I want people to walk away with understanding the origin of Afro-Latinidad in the United States context. So we're gonna get into a bit of micro history here that should set the stage and the foundation for you know, how we understand Afro-Latino culture and Afro-Latinidad today. So there we go. Okay. So we set the stage in the late 19th century here, beginning with the 10 Years' War in Cuba from 1868 to 1878 was a very dynamic time in Cuba. There was a lot of, you know, turmoil and instability going on within the country. And so what winds up taking place is we have this migration of people, you know, mostly wealthy elites, many white Cubans, you know, and intellectuals leaving the country and migrating to the United States. And this really coincided with what was known as the cigar factory boom in the United States, because at the same time that this 10 Years' War is going on, there becomes an increased demand for cigar production, particularly from Cuba and even to a lesser extent, Puerto Rico. But the tobacco there was ripe and people, you know, were demanding, you know, this product in high regard. And so you have these white elite wealthy Cubans that are exiting Cuba and setting up cigar factories initially in the southern parts of the United States. So we see Key West, Tampa, New Orleans, along that Gulf region where the majority of this is taking place. And so naturally, right, with this, you know, cigar factory boom, there's a need for cheap labor. And, you know, it so happens that, you know, the majority of cigar factory workers in Cuba and Puerto Rico were of African descent. And so, you know, while these cigar factories are being set up in the US, there's a call for, you know, mass cheap labor. And so many of these African descended Cubans and Puerto Ricans wind up leaving Cuba and Puerto Rico, and they come to the United States to fill that demand. And so this is really the beginning of what, you know, we see with Afro-Caribbean men and women migrating to the US and intermingling with the you know, pre-existing African-American community and setting up communities, you know, religious, you know, congregations and so on. And this is sprinkling about in, you know, the southern parts of the US, you know, in this mid to late 1800s timeframe. So really starting around Reconstruction era and then moving a little bit more into, you know, post-Reconstruction. And so after this initial settlement takes place in the southern parts of the US, the boom and the demand moves northward into New York City. And this is really where the story of Afro-Latinidad begins to gain some texture, because it's the first time that multi-diasporic connections are made from an Afro-Latino perspective. So not only do you have the you know, wealthy elite white Cuban and Puerto Rican cigar factory owners setting up shop and you know, throughout New York City, but you also have this you know, Black labor force that's coming from these countries and migrating in, and also establishing community with, again, with the pre-existing African-American community, but also the West Indian community that is migrating into New York City, and also, you know, West African communities that are migrating into New York City at the same time. So there's a big mixture and kind of melting pot taking place amongst these African descended people. Now, some people may say, now, what makes the cigar factory so special? You'll see in the picture right here to the left that you have a gentleman that's sitting, above everybody that's working in the factory. And this person was known as the lector, or, so the lector or the lecturer, right? And so the interesting thing about cigar factory work was that it was very intensive, but due to the nature of cigar making, it was very quiet. So you have, the rolling of dry paper, stripping the leaves, you have, the tobacco, going into the paper and what have you. So it was hard work that these gentlemen and they did from, many times sun up to sundown, but it was quiet. And so a way that the cigar factory managers would keep the workforce engaged was by bringing in these lecturers, right? These lectores. And this tradition goes back to Puerto Rico and Cuba, and they would read voluminously. I mean, they would read newspapers, journals, philosophy, poetry. They would listen to classical music. I mean, there was a very rich kind of educational atmosphere in these cigar factories. And many times on their breaks and after work, the laborers would get into these debates, and they would have these lively exchanges that would take place, and they're sitting here talking about philosophical and revolutionary ideas and what have you, which is somewhat atypical, right? Because when you think about the Black labor force in the mid to late 1800s, we usually equate it with sweat and brow work, where people are out in the field all day and they're just making enough money to put some food on the plate. But these cigar factory workers were actually, it was a privilege to be there, because they, were privy to a really rich education, and many times they even learned different languages, because at that time, literature wasn't always available in Spanish. So, sometimes these lecturers would read in English, maybe French. And so it was just a very rich experience. And so as all of this is taking place, these Black laborers, right? These Afro-Cuban and Puerto Rican laborers are actually able to keep pace in conversation with some of these elite, educated white intellectuals that were coming from the same countries and migrating to New York City. And so what begins to manifest are these social clubs and educational houses where Black and white Puerto Rican and Cuban men and women would come together and really start to talk about revolutionary activity, the independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico, what that would look like, and how they wanted to create classless and raceless kind of societies where people would be judged on their merit and not by the color of their skin and what have you. And so this is like really revolutionary kind of forward-thinking stuff that's taking place in the late 1800s. And so what really kind of sets the mark here is January 22nd, 1890, La Liga, or La Liga Sociedad de Instrucción y Recreo, is established. And it was established for the purposes of elevating the character of men of color born in Cuba and Puerto Rico. And so this club or this society is established, and I think it's in Greenwich Village in New York City. And so after a long day's work, many of the members were cigar factory workers. They would come together around 8 o'clock at night, and they would sit and they would have dinner with each other, and they would exchange these ideas. They would learn, and they would do this up until about 12 o'clock in the morning, and then they would go back to their respective places of residence and then wake up in the morning and do it all over again. And this became what was known as an intellectual and political training ground. You see the picture in the backdrop. Sitting in the center right here is Jose Marti, who, if anybody knows or familiar with Cuban history, he's one of the champions of Cuban independence. And it was on his philosophies and what have you that really Cuba was able to be liberated from under Spain and start to go on a different trajectory. But it was the Afro-Cuban and Puerto Rican men that were around Jose Marti that actually heavily contributed to these philosophies and ideals that led to great accomplishments in that country. And so it's important to note as well that this was not a one-off kind of a situation. You know, this was one of the first of many different kinds of clubs and societies that are all taking place and fermenting in New York City at this time. And, you know, so you had Partido Revolucionario Cubano, you had El Club Borinquen, Las Señoras de la Liga, which is really phenomenal because these are Black women from Cuba and Puerto Rico, and many times the wives and sisters of these pioneering men that established their own society in conjunction with La Liga and these other clubs around them. And some of these clubs had 200 plus members, you know, so this was not like 5 or 10 people coming together. No, these were hundreds, you know, of Black, you know, forward-thinking men and women from Cuba and Puerto Rico that came together to really, you know, establish an entirely new community that still has lasting effects to this day. And I think it's particularly important to note that this is all taking place in Jim Crow America. And, you know, slavery ended in Cuba in 1887. It ended in Puerto Rico in 1877. And so this is only 3 and 13 years after the end of slavery in these two countries. And we see these Black men and women already, you know, migrating internationally and making great leaps and bounds for the culture. And so out of these clubs, out of this network that develops, right, and Greenwich Village and Harlem and different communities throughout New York City, we see the leaders of the Cuban Revolutionary Movement. The flags of Cuba and Puerto Rico are made. This is why you see the similarities between the two flags, because it was in the same space that they were developed. We see literary works being published. Many of the first bilingual newspapers and so on come out of this culture, right? Institutions, I mean, and Anita, Professor Nadal mentioned Arturo Schomburg, and we're going to get to him in a second, but it's out of this network that the foundations for Afro-diasporic connections really begin. And so New York set the stage for that ground. And this is just a quote I wanted to read. It says, "Together with the African Americans among whom they lived and with whom they danced, married, formed fraternal lodges, and discussed current events, the members of the community that gathered at La Liga began to develop the sensibilities, politics, and even institutions of an African diaspora. They started to imagine and build ties among African descended people across linguistic and national lines." And so this is powerful. And so I just wanted to showcase, these are some of the portraits. To the extreme left, we have Sotero Figueroa, who is an Afro-Puerto Rican. In the center, Rafael Serra. And these two men were really the foundation and the principles of this La Liga and the other you know, societies that were established as a result of La Liga. And then to the upper right, we see Arturo Schomburg, who comes through this pedigree, if you will, or through this line, this framework, because by the time Arturo Schomburg comes to New York City, these institutions are already well established. And so he comes into this network of people and, you know, takes the consciousness to a whole nother level and actually winds up fully integrating into the African-American community and being, you know, known and highly regarded as one of the foremost scholars and bibliophiles of African descended people in the world. You know, the Schomburg Center, the Schomburg Institute in Harlem is actually, I think, the largest institution for African diasporic works and literary pieces in the country. And so, and Arturo Schomburg comes from Puerto Rico. And below him, we have Jesus Colon, who was also a pioneer of Nuyorican, Afro-Puerto Ricans. He was also the son of a cigar factory worker who he attributes much of his knowledge and understanding of Afro-Latinidad and so on to his father because of how he was educated. And so, you know, this really is the template and the foundation for Afro-Latino culture. And it's what sets up, you know, milestones and monumental kind of historic, you know, events and movements, even to the point of like, people may be familiar with Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association. You know, it was this congealing together and connections of Afro, Cuban, Puerto Rican, and other Afro-diasporic descendants that were coming together and having these conversations, talking about revolution, and, you know, seeking to develop as a people coming together in New York City that really set the tone for the UNIA, for, you know, and later on, you know, Black Panthers and, you know, Young Lords Party and all of these things that wind up developing as a result of the foundation that these men set in place and were a part of in New York City at that time, and the consciousness that was taking place. And so with that, you know, I leave, this is a works cited page if anybody wants to go in and check out some more information. And, you know, and so really just walking away with the context and the understanding that Afro-Latino culture is very rich. It has a long history, and, you know, we can't be relegated to just thinking about us in terms of sports or music. The foundation was laid by Black revolutionary intellectual men and women that wanted to see change and the better of our communities. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Anita. Thank you.
Okay, muchas gracias, y a usted. Excelente. Miriam, if we can just show maybe 1 or 2 minutes of the video, and then others can always go and see it later, because I do want to ask the questions of our guest speakers. I have a few very key questions that I'm sure the audience will love to hear.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Lala Anthony, here to talk about and celebrate Afro-Latinidad. In our food, music, politics, and literature, Afro-Latinos have played a huge role in shaping Latin America and U.S. culture. But these contributions are frequently overlooked, and the size and influence of our community doesn't get the recognition they deserve. Why are there so many misconceptions about Black Latino identity? To find some answers, we need to look at our histories of colonization. Many in the U.S. would be surprised to know that roughly 95% of Africans who were enslaved and survived the Middle Passage were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean. That's right. Today, the Black population in Latin America is actually way bigger than in the U.S. But racial identities develop in different ways in these two regions, which influence how Afro-Latinidad is perceived. See, while all European colonies were founded on white supremacy, their differing approaches to race had a huge impact on the way colonized people self-identified. The Spanish created a caste system for racial mixtures, where Blackness was at the bottom, whiteness was at the top, and several racial categories lay in between. How many of us have grown up hearing the phrase mejorar la raza? That's where the idea comes from. The lighter skin leads to better social status. As Latin America emancipated from Europe and established new nations, they relied on a narrative that mestizaje, the mixing of races and cultures, would create the ideal citizen. They believed that racial mixing would eventually bleach out the Black and indigenous and encourage immigration from European nations to speed up the process. A myth of racial democracy took hold across the region. Many argue that racial mixing itself shows an absence of prejudice and therefore racism cannot exist. But this ideology masks the reality that darker-skinned Latin Americans face systematic discrimination and colorism to this day, which includes unequal access to housing, education, wealth, and political power, as well as beauty ideals that favor European features. In the English colonies, things took shape differently. There was non-consensual mixing between the races there too, but rather than promote mixing, interracial marriage was illegal. And after the U.S. established independence, it created a legal system of segregation to keep Black and white people separate in public spaces. This contributed to the development of a Black-white binary view of race. In the U.S., the idea that you can be Black And Latino is often confusing to a population trained to conflate race, nationality, and ethnicity. People think Latino equals tan skin and Black equals African American only. And because of anti-Blackness, both US and Latin American societies uphold this perception. But in the real world, Black Latinos and African heritage we carry are essential to Latin American culture and identity. It's in our textured hair or the African drums used in cumbia, merengue, and salsa rhythms, to the global phenomenon of reggaeton, in dances like palos, bomba, or samba, in the Afro-diasporic religions that exist across Latin America, like Santeria and Haitian voodoo. And Afro-Latinos have shaped US culture and history too. Puerto Rican scholar Arturo Schomburg is considered one of the fathers of Black history and played an important role in the Harlem Renaissance. Cuban-American John Carlos was one of the athletes who lifted his fist in a Black Power salute at the 1968 Olympics. Activist and professor Miriam Jimenez Roman played a huge part in shaping our country's understanding of Latinidad. We didn't just make individual contributions, we started movements. In the 1960s, civil rights group The Young Lords, emerged and inspired by the Black Panthers, fought to protect community rights. The Nuyorican movement produced poetry and art that recognized Afro and Afro-Taino history. Afro-Cuban rhythms influenced jazz and R&B. And it was Puerto Ricans, Caribbeans, and African Americans in the Bronx who created hip-hop in the 70s and 80s, drawing from their shared struggles. The movement to recognize the experiences and contributions of Black Latinos across Latin America and in the US keeps growing. We celebrate our natural hair. We affirm our Black identity in politics and music and literature. So if we want a more inclusive future, let's start by learning our shared history and honoring Afro-Latinos' place in the culture.
All right. So I'm sure I've been seeing in the text, Mina saying, wow, I didn't know that. This is great. This is awesome. Well, for Shantini, Yosef, and myself, it fills our heart that you guys feel this way. So what I want to end the presentation with is a few questions for our guest. I want to ask both of you, Yosef and Shantini, what does Afro-Latinidad mean to you?
Okay, I'll go first then. So Afro-Latinidad to me means a way of living. It means that I identify with who I am, where I come from, and what I embody. It means that I have curlier hair that is more pronounced, that is more, to me, beautiful, right? And that I have an accent. And then it's okay to have an accent, that it's part of who I am, that I also like to eat arroz, frijoles, pollo, plátanos. I love it, and it's part of who I am. It also means that I have two or more identities, that I'm Caribbean, my Jamaican accent, and I also am Latina, which means that I'm beautiful everywhere, from every aspect. So that's what Afro-Latina means to me.
Hey, Yosef.
Yes, I don't think I can add much to that. I think Shantini did that justice. I'll just say, I think Afro-Latinidad is occupying two spaces, but synergizing it, making it one. It's being both Latino and Black at the same time. And it's also a consciousness. It's being aware of your history and acknowledging, being, affirming your roots and not shying away from the fact that, our history is what it is.
Yes, and the next question, what misconceptions, and this is in relation to race, do you typically encounter as residents of Richmond? The three of us live in Richmond. So Shantini, I'll go back to you.
Well, I will go back to the question that I actually had to write about. It's like can a Black person from be also Spanish speaker, right? So we do come from many different backgrounds, and Lala said it very well. And Yusef and Dr. Professor Nadal has been reaffirming it. We come from many different corners of this world. He mentioned South America, but there are other Latinos living in Europe. There are Latinos living in far other countries where we know that we keep the heritage. It doesn't matter where you come from, it's how you show up and how you recognize that identity. And so one of those misconceptions has always been, how is it that I'm Black and I speak Spanish? So my answer to them is that we come from many different places. We are flavorful and we are beautiful.
Thank you. Well, for the sake of time, I'll go to the last two. Yosef, as a Nuyorican, first of all, can you kind of comment on that for the many that have never heard the word or aren't familiar with it? And also, is it synonymous with African American in New York City based on your experience? And everyone, this is based on an in-depth conversation that I've had with Yosef in the past.
Yeah, thank you. So Nuyorican, for those that don't know, it's exactly what it sounds like. A New York Rican is someone that is either born in Puerto Rico and migrated to New York, and they identify with that New York experience because that's how they were raised, or it's a Puerto Rican who was born and raised in New York City, and they acknowledge their roots coming from Puerto Rico. So I happen to be that of the latter. My grandparents moved to New York City in the 1940s. So I'm actually a third generation Nuyorican. And in terms of the cultures being synonymous with African American culture, in my experience, I would say very much so. And I don't even think it has to be from, like, in New York, you don't have to be Afro Puerto Rican necessarily or Afro Latino to identify with the African American culture. It's really, Latinos and African Americans really live side by side in the same communities. You go to Harlem, we in the same projects, South Bronx, Brooklyn, we're all together. And so I even have white passing Latino friends of mine that I was raised with that acknowledge their African ancestry, and they say, I know it's somewhere in there, and so they represent that consciousness of what it is to be Afro-Latino. And so, yes, the two cultures are very much, mixed together. And that was one thing that I had to battle coming down here to Richmond, was this binary and people only seeing black and white and not really understanding the in-between or the other. And it's not necessarily that way in New York. So I appreciate the question.
Yes, and then our last one, Shantini, what cultural aspects of Afro-Latinidad are reflected in your life as a Afro-Costa Rican? And then just one other thing I want to say, I know many of you in the chat have put in questions, you want to know more, you want to understand. So Yosef, Shantini, and myself, we will put our email address in the chat, and you can feel free to ask us all the questions you want, okay? All right, go ahead, Shantini.
Well, I'm gonna just focus on two specific aspects which relate to music. Music is very a way of communication, and as a Afro Costa Rican, calypso has been a very profound way of communicating our roots, communicating our history, communicating our legacy. And so calypso is an autochthonous Afro-Caribbean music, and it is used with several instruments. They have bango, they have tambor or drums. They have several different instruments, and they have someone who's the singer. And so actually, calypso has been nominated or dedicated as a national patrimony. And Mr. Walter Ferguson, which is my maiden name, my family is Ferguson too, And so he was the one who actually promoted this type of Afro-Caribbean music. Many years have been in the works of that. It kind of sort of sounds like reggae, not reggaeton, but reggae, the slow reggae with the old-fashioned reggae, not the dance hall. It's not that one, but it does tell stories. So they use it to tell stories in very autochthonous and very unique countries. And so that's something that I would like to share with you. There are various YouTube videos where you could see and enjoy Mr. Ferguson's demonstration of Costa Rica's Calypso.
Muchas gracias. I see that some students had to go because they have other classes, but Yosef and Shantini and myself, we are here to take any questions that you would like. For those of you who can remain for another 10 minutes or so, please feel free to just unmute and ask us, anything that you would like, or any comments are welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Genevieve, and very, very good presentation by both of you, Shantini and Yusef. Am I pronouncing that right? Yes, very educational. My father's from is African American. My mother's from France, and I don't get the opportunity to be called Afro French or whatever. I'm just called Black. Okay. I took Spanish because Shantini, we're buying our second home in Costa Rica. So, and I spoke no Spanish 2 years ago when we went to visit. So I'm taking Spanish down at VCU. And I didn't see Guanacaste on your map. And my question is, what is the population of Afro-Latinos? What is the population of Afro-Latinos in the Guanacaste area of Costa Rica?
Great question. Awesome. So definitely I can see that we had to cut the map a little bit, but the population in Guanacaste are predominantly natives of Costa Rica, which they're indigenous. So I would say 80-20. There are various that have intermarried, and so that is a predominant area. Usually Guanacaste is connected to Nicaragua, so there's a lot of immigration from Nicaragua to Guanacaste to enter the country, primarily due to political issues, but also because of the area and the ability. So that's the reason why there's much more, like we call them whites, because of a lack of name of categories, but they are the natives of the country. So 80-20.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to email you too.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Mr. Neves.
Anyone else?
Well, I actually wanted to say something. It's not so much a question, but I just wanted to say that it's incredibly, for me, I think that it's incredibly important that we celebrate and raise awareness about Afro-Latinidad and just in general about cultural, racial, language, etc., diversity within the Latino community. I think that many people do not realize the diversity of Latin America. Believe it or not, I recently heard in a DEI workshop, actually just on Monday, that a participant said that they thought that cultural challenges and racism and things like that were exclusive to the United States because they thought that all Hispanic people were just Hispanic people and they were all the same. That's how she described it. So it makes me very happy to see workshops like this that provide information and celebration to other aspects of our culture that really do have such an incredible influence about our music, about our culture, about the way that we do things, our food, and in general, because even though there are so many different aspects of our culture, all of these different things intertwine really do make that aspect of our food, our music, our traditions is all part of it. So I just want to say that I love that we're showing something that is not the idea or the mainstream of what a lot of people out there think that being Hispanic or Latino is, you know, because we are so much from so many different backgrounds. So I just have to say this presentation has made my heart sing.
Muchas gracias, Gabriela. Any other questions? Okay, if not,
You know what?
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
My name is Dr. Carlos Medina, and I'm Yahusef's father, and I'm so proud to have listened to this wonderful, wonderful presentation from both panelists. And as a first-generation New Yorican, I'm just incredibly proud. And nice to see you, Dr. Nadal.
Oh, well, nice to have you. Qué placer. Your son is wonderful. We love him. Lo queremos muchísimo. Yes.
Thanks, Pop.
What a surprise, Yosef. We didn't know your father would be
I
here.
hope I haven't embarrassed my son.
Oh,
No,
muchos
No, it's good.
abrazos.
proud.
Yeah.
Felicidades.
Everybody sees the direct
Yes.
link right there.
That's it right there.
Yeah. Epa, wepa. All right. Well, we put our email addresses in the chat, everyone. If you have any other questions, please feel free to shoot us emails. Dr. Kadiba, do you think we might need to do a part 2?
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? There was 80 people in attendance. This is a conversation that needs going, and OMSA is committing. Let's keep this going. I am so excited. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the questions and the comments. It was an absolute pleasure for us. Hasta luego. Ciao.
Hasta luego.
Thank you.
Nos vemos.
Nos vemos. Ciao.